The tragedy is that most people have unconsciously set their standards far too low. They've accepted less than they deserve in their relationships, their income, their health, their personal growth. They've become comfortable with discomfort, familiar with failure, and resigned to circumstances that are far beneath their potential. But here's what I've learned after decades of studying successful people and working with individuals from all walks of life. Your life will never rise above the standards you set for yourself. Think about this for a moment. What are your current standards? What have you decided is acceptable in your life? Are you accepting a job that doesn't fulfill you because it pays the bills? Are you tolerating relationships that drain your energy because you're afraid of being alone? Are you neglecting your health because you think you don't have time to exercise or eat properly? These aren't just choices you're making. These are standards you've unconsciously set, and they're determining the quality of your entire existence. Now, I want you to understand something fundamental about human nature. We don't get what we want in life, we get what we settle for. There's a big difference between wanting something and having standards that demand it. Wanting is passive. It's hoping and wishing without the commitment to do what's necessary. Having standards is active. It's drawing a line in the sand and saying, I will not accept anything less than this. When you truly raise your standards, something magical happens. You begin to attract opportunities, people, and circumstances that match your new level of expectation. It's not magic in the mystical sense, but it's the natural result of how you begin to show up in the world when you demand more from yourself in your life. Let me share a story with you. Years ago, I met a man who was struggling financially. He was working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet, and constantly stressed about money. When I asked him about his financial goals, he said he wanted to be wealthy, but when I looked at his daily habits, his associations, his learning patterns, and his standards, I saw something different. His standards were set for survival, not success. He was accepting any work that came his way, spending time with people who complained about money but never did anything about it, and filling his mind with entertainment instead of education. I challenged him to raise his standards, not just to want more money, but to demand excellence from himself, to refuse to accept anything less than work that paid him what he was truly worth, to surround himself with people who were financially successful, or at least striving to be, to invest in his education and personal development as if his life depended on it, because it did. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began immediately. When you raise your standards, you start making different decisions. Instead of taking the first job offered, he began to position himself for opportunities that matched his new standards. Instead of spending evenings watching television, he spent them reading books and attending seminars. Instead of complaining with his friends about how unfair life was, he began associating with people who were creating the lives they wanted. Within 2 years, his income had tripled. Within 5 years, he had started his own business and was well on his way to the financial independence he had once only dreamed about. What changed? His standards. And when his standards changed, everything else followed. This brings me to a crucial point. Your standards are not just about what you will accept from life, but what you will accept from yourself. Most people are far too lenient with themselves. They make commitments and break them. They set goals and abandon them at the first sign of difficulty. They promise themselves they'll change, but when the going gets tough, they revert to their old patterns. Successful people have learned to be tough on themselves but easy on others. They hold themselves to higher standards than they hold anyone else. They understand that personal integrity, the alignment between what you say you'll do and what you actually do, is the foundation of all success. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you lower your standard. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself, especially when you don't feel like it, you raise your standards and strengthen your character. Your standards determine your habits, and your habits determine your destiny. If you have low standards for how you spend your time, you'll develop habits of procrastination and time wasting. If you have high standards for how you invest your time, you'll develop habits of productivity and purposeful action. If you have low standards for what you put into your body, you'll develop habits that undermine your health and energy. If you have high standards for your physical well-being, you'll develop habits that enhance your vitality and longevity. The beautiful thing about standards is that they create a positive momentum in your life. When you raise your standards in one area, it naturally lifts your standards in other areas. A person who demands excellence from themselves in their physical fitness will often find that excellence spilling over into their work, their relationships, and their personal development. A person who raises their standards for their financial life will often discover improvements in their discipline, their learning, and their time management. But let me warn you about something important. When you begin to raise your standards, you may face resistance, not just from yourself, but from others around you. Some people in your life may not appreciate the new you that's emerging. They may prefer you the way you were because your low standards made them feel comfortable about their own low standards. When you start demanding more from life, it can make others uncomfortable about what they're accepting. This is why one of the most important standards you must set is about the people you allow into your inner circle. You must raise your standards for relationships. You must be selective about who gets your time, your energy, and your attention. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or look down on others. It means you recognize that you become like the people you spend the most time with, and you choose your associations accordingly. Jim Rohn taught me something I'll never forget. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Think about that. Look at the 5 people you interact with most frequently. Look at their income, their health, their relationships, their attitude toward life, their personal growth. The average of these 5 people is likely very close to where you are in these areas of life. If you want to raise your life to a new level, you must raise your standards for the people you allow to influence you. This doesn't mean you abandon people who are struggling or that you only associate with millionaires. It means you choose to spend your most valuable time with people who inspire you to be better, who challenge you to grow, who support your dreams and goals rather than discourage them. It means you limit your time with people who constantly complain, who make excuses, who drain your energy with their negativity. Your standards for relationships extend beyond friendship to romance as well. Too many people settle for relationships that don't inspire them, that don't challenge them to grow, that don't align with their values and goals. They accept treatment that is far below what they deserve because they fear being alone or because they don't believe they can attract someone better. When you raise your standards for relationships, you begin to attract people who match those standards. You begin to command the respect you deserve because you respect yourself enough to demand it. You create boundaries that protect your energy and your emotional well-being. You choose partners who add value to your life rather than subtract from it. The same principle applies to your professional life. What are your standards for the work you do? Do you accept any job just to pay the bills, or do you seek work that challenges you, fulfills you, and compensates you fairly for the value you provide? Do you settle for employers who don't appreciate your contributions, or do you position yourself to work with organizations that recognize and reward excellence? Your professional standards determine not just your income, but your sense of purpose and fulfillment. When you have high standards for your career, you invest in developing skills that make you more valuable. You seek opportunities that stretch your abilities and expand your potential. You refuse to stay in situations that don't honor your worth or contribute to your growth. But raising your standards isn't just about external circumstances. It's fundamentally about raising your standards for yourself. What do you expect from yourself each day? What level of effort do you demand from yourself? What quality of thinking do you accept from yourself? Most people have incredibly low standards for their daily performance. They accept mediocre effort as acceptable. They allow themselves to drift through days without clear purpose or intention. They tolerate negative thinking, self-doubt, and mental laziness as normal. But if you want to attract a better life, you must demand better from yourself. This means setting standards for your daily routine. Successful people understand that how you start your day often determines how the rest of your day unfolds. They have standards for when they wake up, how they prepare themselves mentally and physically for the day, what they focus their attention on first thing in the morning. It means having standards for your learning and growth. In our rapidly changing world, the person who stops learning stops growing, and the person who stops growing starts dying. You must set standards that require you to constantly expand your knowledge, develop new skills, and challenge your current ways of thinking. Your standards for learning will determine whether you spend your free time consuming entertainment or investing in education. They'll determine whether you read books that challenge your mind or just scroll through social media. They'll determine whether you seek out mentors and teachers who can accelerate your growth or just hope that somehow things will get better on their own. Speaking of mentors, one of the most important standards you can set is to always be learning from someone who has achieved what you want to achieve. Find people who have the marriage you want, the business success you desire, the health and vitality you're seeking, the financial freedom you're working toward. Study them, learn from them, model their strategies and their mindset. This is where many people make a crucial mistake. They try to figure everything out on their own instead of learning from those who have already traveled the path they want to walk. They waste years making mistakes that could have been avoided simply by finding the right mentors and teachers. Your standards must also extend to how you handle failure and setbacks. Everyone faces challenges, disappointments, and temporary defeats. The difference between successful people and those who struggle isn't that successful people face fewer problems. It's that they have higher standards for how they respond to problems. When you have high standards for your response to adversity, you see setbacks as temporary and specific rather than permanent, pervasive. You look for the lesson in every difficulty. You ask better questions, not why is this happening to me, but what can I learn from this and how can this make me stronger? People with low standards for handling adversity become victims of their circumstances. They blame others, make excuses, and give up when things get difficult. People with high standards for handling challenges see adversity as an opportunity to grow, to develop resilience, to prove to themselves what they're truly capable of achieving. This brings me to one of the most important standards of all, your standards for taking responsibility. You must raise your standards to the point where you take complete responsibility for your life and everything in it. This doesn't mean you caused everything that happens to you, but it means you take responsibility for how you respond to everything that happens to you. When you have high standards for personal responsibility, you stop being a victim and start being a creator. You stop looking for people to blame and start looking for ways to improve. You stop making excuses and start making progress. You understand that while you may not be responsible for everything that happens to you, you are responsible for what you do about it. This level of responsibility is liberating because it puts you in control of your life. Instead of feeling powerless over your circumstances, you recognize that you have the power to change your circumstances by changing yourself. Instead of waiting for conditions to improve, you improve your ability to handle any conditions. Your financial standards deserve special attention because money touches every area of your life. What are your standards for how much money you earn? What are your standards for how you manage the money you have? What are your standards for learning about financial principles and investment strategies? Too many people have unconsciously set their financial standards at just enough to get by. They've accepted that they'll always struggle with money, that they'll never be able to afford the things they really want, that financial freedom is for other people but not for them. These low standards become self-fulfilling prophecies. When you raise your financial standards, you begin to make different choices. You invest in yourself through education and skill development because you understand that you are your most important asset. You learn to manage money properly because you refuse to accept a life of financial stress and limitation. You develop multiple streams of income because you won't settle for the vulnerability of depending on a single source. People with high financial standards understand that becoming wealthy isn't just about making more money, it's about becoming the kind of person who attracts and keeps wealth. They develop the disciplines, the habits, the mindset, and the character that wealth requires. They understand that you don't just get wealthy and then become disciplined. You become disciplined first and then attract wealth. Your standards for health and physical well-being are equally crucial. Your body is the vehicle that will carry you through life. What are your standards for how you treat this precious gift? Do you accept being overweight, out of shape, and low on energy? Or do you demand vitality and physical excellence from yourself? When you raise your standards for health, you make choices that honor your body rather than abuse it. You choose foods that fuel your energy rather than drain it. You make time for exercise because you understand that physical fitness affects every other area of your life. You get adequate sleep because you refuse to accept the mental fog and emotional instability that come with chronic fatigue. People with high health standards understand that taking care of their body isn't vanity, it's responsibility. They know that their physical condition affects their mental clarity, their emotional stability, their confidence, and their ability to pursue their goals with energy and enthusiasm. Your standards must also encompass your emotional and spiritual life. What do you accept in terms of your daily emotional state? Do you allow yourself to be constantly stressed, worried, and anxious, or do you demand inner peace and emotional mastery from yourself? When you raise your emotional standards, you take responsibility for managing your inner state. You understand that while you can't control everything that happens to you, you can control your response to what happens to you. You develop practices like meditation, prayer, journaling, or other methods of maintaining emotional equilibrium. You also raise your standards for the thoughts you allow to dominate your mind. You refuse to accept constant negative self-talk, worry about things you can't control, or mental patterns that diminish your confidence and optimism. You feed your mind with positive, constructive, empowering ideas because you understand that your thoughts create your reality. Now, I want to address something important about the process of raising your standards. It's not enough to simply decide you want higher standards. You must bridge the gap between where you are now and where you want to be. This bridge is built with consistent daily actions that align with your new standards. If you want to raise your financial standards, you must begin immediately to act like a person who has high financial standards. This means creating a budget, living below your means, investing in your financial education, and making decisions based on long-term wealth building rather than short-term gratification. If you want to raise your health standards, you must begin immediately to act like a person with high health standards. This means planning your meals, scheduling your exercise, getting adequate sleep, and making daily choices that support your physical well-being. If you want to raise your relationship standards, you must begin immediately to act like a person who deserves high-quality relationships. This means treating yourself with respect, setting appropriate boundaries, communicating clearly and honestly, and refusing to accept treatment that doesn't align with your worth. The key is consistency. Your standards aren't what you do occasionally when you're motivated. They're what you do consistently, especially when you don't feel like doing it. They're the non-negotiable minimums you set for yourself in every important area of your life. This brings me to the concept of systems versus goals. While goals are important, systems are what create lasting change. A goal is what you want to achieve. A system is the collection of daily practices that will get you there. Your standards are really about creating systems that automatically produce the results you want. For example, if your goal is to lose weight, your system might include meal planning on Sundays, working out 4 times per week, and tracking your food intake daily. If your goal is to increase your income, your system might include reading for 1 hour daily, networking with 2 new people each week, and developing a new skill every quarter. When you have systems in place that align with your standards, you don't have to rely on willpower or motivation alone. The systems carry you forward even when you don't feel like taking action. They create momentum that makes success inevitable rather than just possible. Your environment plays a crucial role in maintaining your standards. You must create an environment that supports your new standards rather than undermines them. This includes your physical environment, your social environment, and your information environment. Your physical environment should reflect and reinforce your standards. If you have high standards for health, your kitchen should be stocked with nutritious foods, not junk. If you have high standards for learning, your home should be filled with books and educational materials, not just entertainment. If you have high standards for financial success, your workspace should be organized and professional, reflecting the success you're creating. Your social environment, as we discussed earlier, should consist of people who support and challenge your growth rather than those who encourage mediocrity. Your information environment should feed your mind with ideas, strategies, and inspiration that align with your goals rather than negativity, gossip, and distractions. One of the most powerful aspects of raising your standards is that it affects not only your life but the lives of those around you. When you begin to live at a higher level, you give others permission to do the same. You become an example of what's possible. You inspire others to examine their own standards and consider raising them. This is particularly important if you're a parent. Your children are watching everything you do, and they're learning what's acceptable, what's normal, what's normal. The standards you set for yourself become the standards they learn to accept for themselves. When you raise your standards, you're not just changing your life, you're potentially changing the trajectory of your children's lives and their children's lives. But even if you don't have children, you have influence over people in your life. Your coworkers, friends, family members, and community are all affected by the standards you maintain. When you refuse to accept mediocrity in your own life, you challenge others to examine the mediocrity in theirs. Let me share with you some practical steps for raising your standards in key areas of your life. First, you must get clear about what you currently accept versus what you want to experience. Take an honest inventory of your life. What are you settling for in your career, your relationships, your health, your finances, your personal growth? Write down your current reality in each area, and then write down what you want that area to look like. The gap between where you are and where you want to be represents the standards you need to raise. Don't try to raise all your standards at once. Focus on one or two areas where improvement would have the greatest impact on your overall quality of life. Next, identify the daily actions and decisions that will close the gap between your current reality and your desired standards. If you want to raise your financial standards, what would you need to do differently with money every single day? If you want to raise your health standards, what daily habits would need to change? Create what I call non-negotiable minimums for yourself. These are the absolute minimum standards you'll accept in key areas of your life. For example, you might decide that you'll never again accept a job that pays you less than a certain amount, or that you'll never again go more than 2 days without exercising, or that you'll never again spend time with people who consistently drain your energy. These non-negotiable minimums become your boundaries. They protect you from slipping back into patterns that don't serve you. They ensure that even on your worst days, you're still maintaining standards that move you forward rather than backward. It's also crucial to celebrate your progress as you raise your standards. Acknowledge when you make decisions that align with your new standards, even if the results aren't immediately visible. Every time you choose the action that matches your higher standards instead of the easy option that matches your old standards, you're reinforcing the new pattern and making it stronger. Remember that raising your standards is not about perfection, it's about progress. You don't have to be perfect in maintaining your new standards, but you do have to be consistent. When you slip back into old patterns, and you will occasionally, don't beat yourself up. Instead, recommit to your standards and get back on track as quickly as possible. The compound effect of maintaining higher standards over time is extraordinary. Small improvements maintained consistently create dramatic results. The person who raises their standards just a little bit in multiple areas of life will experience a transformation that seems miraculous to those who haven't understood this principle. Think about it this way. If you improve just 1% in key areas of your life every day, you'll be 37% better in those areas by the end of the year. That's the power of raising your standards and maintaining them consistently over time. Your standards also determine how you handle success when it comes. Many people work hard to achieve a goal, but then they relax their standards once they've reached it, and they end up losing what they worked so hard to gain. People who maintain their wealth, their health, their relationships, and their success are those who understand that the standards that got them there must be maintained to keep them there. This is why lottery winners often end up broke within a few years. They receive money without developing the standards that wealthy people have for managing money. They had the money, but they didn't have the standards that would allow them to keep and multiply it. On the other hand, people who build wealth through developing their standards usually keep and increase that wealth, because their standards created the wealth in the first place. Even if they lost everything, they would rebuild it because they have the standards, the habits, the mindset, and the character that create wealth. The same principle applies to every area of life. The person who develops the standards that create a great marriage will likely have a great marriage, even if they have to start over. The person who develops the standards that create excellent health will likely maintain that health throughout their life because their standards prevent them from making decisions that would undermine it. This brings me to a crucial point about the relationship between standards and identity. Your standards are not just about what you do, they're about who you are. When you truly raise your standards, you're not just changing your behavior, you're changing your identity. You begin to see yourself as the kind of person who lives at that higher level. Identity change is powerful because we all have a subconscious need to act consistently with how we see ourselves. If you see yourself as someone who is punctual, you'll find ways to be on time. If you see yourself as someone who is financially responsible, you'll make decisions that reflect financial responsibility. If you see yourself as someone who takes excellent care of their health, you'll naturally make choices that support your physical well-being. This is why affirmations alone don't work for most people. You can't just repeat "I am wealthy" while continuing to make financial decisions that reflect poverty consciousness. You can't just say "I am healthy" while maintaining habits that undermine your health. Your identity must be supported by actions and standards that are consistent with that identity. But when you raise your standards and maintain them consistently, your identity begins to shift. You start to see evidence that you are indeed the kind of person who lives at a higher level. This creates a positive feedback loop. Higher standards